Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor. Moving on to the ways in which you can organize your writing. So from a writer's point of view, organizing involves searching for a pattern or a sequence that is appropriate to your information, your goals, and also your readers' needs as well. So we can say that there are 4 basic discourse strategies that you could use or adapt to your needs, namely expository discourse, narrative discourse, descriptive discourse, and finally argumentative discourse. This very term discourse means more or less a discussion. Alright, yes. So generally exposition, narration, description, and argumentation are considered to be the basic forms of discourse. So when do we use each one of these discourses? Here comes the answer. That is, when a writer is concerned with setting forth facts, then the form of discourse is known as exposition. That is, when the person who is writing a piece of work is concerned with factual statements, then the form is known as exposition. Suppose the writer presents the ideas in terms of temporal action, then the form of discourse is known as narration. So in terms of space and giving details about it, it is description. And when the writer intends to resolve conflict of facts, then it is known as argumentation. So these forms do not exist as pure forms. They in fact are intermixed, and one can only talk about a dominant form in a piece. Now let's focus our attention towards the expository discourse. Expository writing is the most common form of writing. That is, this involves classification, grouping, definition, illustration, giving instructions, giving directions, advice, processes, and even systems. So while grouping involves selection, classification involves breaking down of a broad topic into parts. In contrast to these, definition puts out the characteristics that distinguish a particular thing under discussion from others, and as we all know, illustration, that is examples, involve exemplification of ideas under discussion. Moving on to the next discourse, that is narrative discourse. Narration depends chiefly on temporal order, that is upon actions in a chronological order. Chronological order involves a sequencing of events or actions from beginning to end. A skilled narrator is able to arrange the details in such a way that a reader's interest rises to a climax at some point in the narration. The narration in turn can range from short storytelling, as in novels and short stories, to anecdotes used for illustration, explanation, or even support. Sometimes, for special effects, we make use of aspects such as flashbacks. This is prominent even in literature. Alright, an author may begin his or her narration from the end, that is, maybe the present time, and then through a process of flashback, this author may return to the beginning and then give the full events till the end. Also begin in the middle of a chronological sequence, narrate events leading up to the point of narration, and then proceed to complete the narration of events. Both the above kinds of presentation of events can generally be found in novels and films. So like in those films that I mentioned, those Malayalam movies such as CBI 5 or the Malayalam movie Classmate for that matter. Do you know any Hindi movies? Bhool Bhulaiya 2, if you have watched that. They start off with the flashback in Bhool Bhulaiya 2, right? Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, if you have watched. Yes, it is through the flashback that the life of Rahul and Anjali and all those events are narrated Yes, same with the case of Om Shanti Om. Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. Yes, correct. We still can think of only the 90s movies. The sources of your narratives could be based on your memories, based on your friends and favorite places, based on events and its participants, based on your imagination and wishes, etc. So all these could be the sources of your writing. So you can devise your plan by asking the following 4 basic questions. That is, 1. What is special or typical about my narrative? 2. Why am I telling this story? 3. What kind of readers am I writing for? 4. How will my reader best understand my plan and purpose? Yes. So in the initial stages of your writing, you can consider the following stylistic features. What do you mean by stylistic features? Those features that can add to your style of writing. Very often writers incorporate such aspects into their piece of work. The 4 stylistic features mentioned are simplicity, conversational style, individual turn of phrase, and concrete and precise vocabulary. It would be great if it is much simple in structure and language. It would be better if it has a conversational style. Then precise vocabulary would also be useful. So that is the summary of the narrative discourse. I suppose you understood, and you might be able to relate more with this discourse because of its predominance in films and novels. Shall we move on to the descriptive discourse? Yes, can you give me a minute, please? Let's move on to the descriptive discourse. Description also involves narration, but of a different kind. That is, it is a kind of picture making indicating what someone, something, or some place looks like. All descriptions involve spatial dimensions as well. Any description would involve one of the 2 possibilities. So, which are these 2 possibilities? 1. The description would proceed from a particular to a general. 2. From a general to a particular. Very often we have such questions for these competitive examinations. I hope you have attempted any of these at least. So at times an idea can generate from the general to the particular or from a particular to the general. At times we may start off with a general broad idea, then we'll come on to the point that we'll be discussing, or rather the point that we'll be focusing upon. The other way is to start with the particular point and then move on to the broad ways. Alright, so for example, a description of a scenery could either begin with a central focus on a particular detail and then proceed to other things that relate to it, giving us thereby a general picture. One could also describe the scenery in general terms and then focus on particular items within it. Now comes argumentative discourse. So in argumentative discourse, the writer argues a case or expresses an opinion by looking at a problem from both the sides. He look at side A and also side B. Any structure representing argumentation may take into account the pros and cons of the argument. Yes, pros refer to the positive aspect and cons refer to the negative aspect. Very often argumentation can be done in 3 different ways. First, one can give one's own arguments by taking an affirmative position. What do you mean by an affirmative position? Very often statements for that matter. Second, one can give further evidence to counterbalance the arguments of an opinion. That is, in order to prove the other person wrong, you can bring in your opinions. Third, one can point out the fallacies in one's opponent's arguments in order to discredit them. So what do you mean by the term fallacies? It often refers to problems. You can focus on the problems of your opponent's argument and you can discredit the opponent. Strong argumentation demands perceptive reasoning and careful perusal of evidence in order to present one's own arguments or in order to belittle the opponent's arguments. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. So that concludes the 4 types of discourses, the 4 basic discourse strategies that you could use while writing, namely expository discourse, narrative discourse, descriptive discourse, and argumentative discourse. So from the examination point of view, you'll have to write descriptive answer if at all they ask you a question on the types of discourse or the forms of discourse. So shall we move on to the writing process? This is also a very important section. It also has much relevance to your real life situations. That is, whenever you write something, you'll have to follow these steps. An ideal writing would definitely follow these steps, mainly writing the first draft, revising the first draft, refining it, editing it, and finally the most important part, that is proofreading. Alright, so let's look at these steps one by one, shall we? So we shall continue. So far we have been discussing some of the ways to organize our ideas. Now let's have a detailed look at these steps. Firstly, writing the first draft. To be frank, your first draft is more like an experiment, because that will help you understand what you have to say, and you know you will be reworking on this draft anyway. So it is an attempt to build a rough framework of content, meaning and form which will improve on later. More or less it is a provisional writing. What do you mean by a provisional writing? It is a temporary writing. You will be reworking on that for that matter. So when you finish your first rough draft, you will not have spent so much time and effort that you will be unwilling to change or discard part or all that you have written. That is, you will be revising the first draft. Now comes revising the first draft. Revising begins with a careful review of your first draft in order to find out if you have actually done what you set out to do. That is, you will be concerned with what you left out, what you have included that you do not need, whether you can make this draft achieve your goals, etc. At times, due to time constraints or due to some external pressure, you might not have mentioned some crucial points, right? So this is the time to check whether you have mentioned everything that need to be mentioned. Similarly, you can also cut out those things that are irrelevant to your writing, to your purpose, and for your subject matter for that matter. Yes, you can also check whether this draft achieves your goal or not. Remember that revision is a thinking process that occurs throughout the writing process. It means looking at your writing with a fresh eye. Whenever you sit for the revision, try to look at from a different perspective, that is from a fresh eye. Sometimes new ideas will encourage you to begin an entirely new draft with a different focus or approach. Yes, just remember that revision occurs throughout the writing process. Now comes the third aspect, that is refining. This is time to look at your examples, illustrations, evidences, etc. You can use this time to add explanations and details without having to rewrite the whole draft. Okay, this is what you do during the defining process. That is, you can ask whether do these support the main ideas, do the subsections follow each other logically, do your examples really exemplify and explain. Likewise, is there anything missing? You can also check that. Now comes editing. Editing is simply a careful reading of the draft. This is done to ensure that everything is the way you want, everything is written in the way you want it to be, and it also ensures that there are no mistakes that you may regret at a later point of time. So editing will be easier if you know how to go about it and what to look for. So there are some aspects that you need to keep in mind while you sit for the editing process. Firstly, the paragraphs. Secondly, sentences. Thirdly, vocabulary. Fourthly, format, fifthly, indentation, and finally, visual aids. So let's have a look at sentences. You need to read your text sentence by sentence and see if there has to be changes which are mandatory to be made. Now comes vocabulary. It is a good idea to focus at this stage on the words that you used. In our previous session, we discussed active and passive vocabulary. I hope you remember. So you can make use of antonyms, or you can make use of synonyms for the words that you keep on repeating, and that would be much better. Yes. Do the words mean what you want them to mean? Will your readers understand what you wish to state? Does your vocabulary have a vast range, etc.? Yes. Now comes the formatting. That is, headings should be consistent throughout the draft. This is, all main headings should have the same typography, spacing, placing, etc. Yes, you must follow the same. For example, if you have used the font Times New Roman for one heading, then you'll have to maintain that consistently throughout the write-up. For all the subheadings also, it would be better if you could use the same format. Similarly, if you have capitalized one subheading, then it would be better to capitalize the others also as well. So all such minute details should be taken care of. I was referring to a printed write-up. Alright. Yes. Now comes indentation. That should be consistent throughout the draft. If it is, what justified indent, right? It is, I suppose that is the name given to the equal indentation. Yes, indentation could be of right, left, middle, and justified, I believe. Anybody knows about that? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yes. Now comes the visual aid. By visual aid, we can refer to the charts or the graphs, etc. You need to take a close look at the visual aids, including tables and drawings. See that they are at the appropriate places in the text. Be sure each visual aid has a title that explains what it is. Even in your course books, you can see that figure 1.1, figure 1.2, etc. Right? Yes. Now comes the last and important step, which is of great importance while writing a draft, that is proofreading. Dear learners, remember that it is not just rereading. It has more to it. It is a careful word by word or line by line review of your first draft. It is done to make sure that everything is written the way it should be written. So there are some tips that you can make use of while proofreading. That is, you need concentration. Concentration means getting rid of distractions and potential interruptions while conducting proofreading. And there are some grammar check or spell check applications and other options on the computer. So it is advisable not to entirely rely on such aspects, because these programs work with a limited number of rules, so they cannot identify every error. Then read slowly and read every word. Check the punctuation, and you must always pay attention to capitalization, and if there is a missing comma, colon, semicolon, etc. If there is a title and a subtitle, make sure that you separate the title from the subtitle using colon. Alright, another important thing is to capitalize the content words. In our previous session, we studied what content words are. Whenever a content word appears in a title, you will have to capitalize that word. If you are using numbers, check them. We often make a mistake by omitting or adding a 0. Such things must be taken care of. Another error that we see is that at times the student might start using numbers. Okay, towards the end, this person must be using some shape in order to write that. Am I making sense to you? Yeah, if you are following numbers, then follow that throughout the write-up. So, as I mentioned, if you are using numbers, check them. We often make mistakes with numbers. Finally, it is important to get somebody's assistance to proofread. Why should you do so? It is because if you have been constantly reading the same draft, you might get used to it and you might not be able to find the mistakes. Alright, but if a different person looks at it, he or she will be at ease to find the mistakes. So get somebody else to proofread it once, because after a few readings we become blind to our own errors. We looked at writing skills and the effective strategies to improve our writing skills. We discussed the 6 steps for writing, including planning, considering your reader, thorough investigation, organization, writing a full draft, revising, and refining. Thereafter, we discussed the methods of writing, that is the pre-writing, writing, and rewriting stages. The 3 key elements of writing includes the purpose, subject matter, and reader. Then in order to gather information, you can make use of highlighters, you can make notes, you can do brainstorming, you can make use of mind map, etc. Knowing your reader is also of great importance. So when you begin to write, you need to be aware of the thesis statement, paragraph division, topic sentence, etc. are of great importance. Thereafter, we discussed the various forms of discourses, namely expository discourse, narrative discourse, descriptive discourse, and argumentative discourse. Finally, we concluded with the writing process and the various stages, such as writing the first draft, revising the first draft, refining, editing, and proofreading. So, in short, we can say that in this section or in this session, we have discussed the various techniques of good writing. We discussed in some detail the method of writing, that is writing a thesis statement, elaborating on it, and writing effective introductions and conclusions. Remember? Yes. We have also introduced, or we have also discussed the various discourse types, as I mentioned, and the process of writing draft, refining them, editing, and finally proofreading them. So that's all for today. And about the TEE, from the TEE perspective, you will have an essay question probably, and the question would be from organizing your writing. That is, they'll ask you a question regarding the forms of discourses, and then the writing process and the steps involved could also be a question. You should have an idea regarding the topic sentence and a general overview of the writing skill and its advantages. Alright, so there we come to the end of today's session. In our next session, we will discuss yet another aspect of English communication.